You got to define out what is your goal? What are you aiming for? After we define what is the goal, the next step is to figure out what are the drivers, what are the incremental things, the milestones that we need to work on to help us actually achieve those goals. Welcome back to a brand new podcast that we are doing called The Golden Age of Business. Lola, welcome back. It's been a while. How are you?
It has been a while. I'm doing really well, Terrell. How are you? Happy to be back. Happy to be back with the audience, with the old audience, with the new audience, and just really excited to talk through this topic. I think it's going to be a really good one. It's going to help a lot of people, so I'm excited about that. How are you doing?
I am doing great. I mean, a lot has been going on, a lot has been changing, and I'm super excited about this one because I've been like traveling around and speaking and testing out some of the content and having conversations with people. And people are really loving the golden age. I mean, this is definitely, I would say, probably some of our best content so far, in my opinion.
Ooh, that's a pretty tall order. I would agree. I actually would agree because I think that over the last couple of years, I feel like we've been refining. We kind of started out when we first started out with the Business Talk Library. For those of you that don't know, kind of like our history, we were very focused on just gathering, well, mostly Terrell. Terrell was very focused. I was doing the editing in the background, very focused on gathering just insight, information, interviewing hundreds of business owners just to really understand what were the pain points they were seeing in the business, what was their story, how did they get to where they got to, right? And I feel like that really sets you up to really understand, and you can give me your perspective on this, like where the pain points were, what the commonalities were. And I feel like for a lot of business owners, especially when we would do the round at the end where we would ask for like, what are the top two things, advices you would give to people? I feel like one way or another, the advice was kind of along the same lines, right? There was a common recurring factor. So, how do you feel like the interviews that you did kind of at the beginning, all of the content we've recorded from law firms and finance to like the stuff your accountant isn't telling you, and now we're here at the golden age, like how do you feel like that impacted and kind of played a role in now coming to the realization of the golden age?
Yeah, I think it played a huge role because, as you said, I mean, we started off doing a ton of interviews. I mean, I think in year one, we did over 200 interviews. And
Mhm.
I would say to date, we probably done over 1,000 different videos, interviews, combination of speaking engagements, all of this fun stuff. And we work with companies in the US, companies around the world. And it's been very, very good, I think, to get a perspective on what is going on in different parts of business and different industries, as well as what's going on, in different countries, different states. And I think in all of that, you start to see enough of a trend where you start to see some patterns. And one of the biggest patterns that I've seen, and which is why we decided to do this series, I think, is people are really struggling to actually take things to the next level, because a lot
Mm.
of people, what they're doing is they're hitting this ceiling to where they are performing, or their team and whatever's going on in their business, and they're just getting stuck. And it's like they know that there's something more, and they know that there's more that could be done, or more that they could do, but for whatever reason they're getting stuck. And so that's where I went into like this deep research on trying to figure out how can we help people. And that's kind of how we came to stumble across the golden age, and really just piecing it together from a little bit of, psychology, some on how the brain works, how achievement works, and how business works, and entrepreneurship, and all of these fun stuff we were able to pull from the thousands of video content to come in with this one very simple process. And so I think all of it played a huge role.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think especially because I think sometimes as a business owner, you kind of get stuck it's easy to get stuck in just the day to day. It's easy to get stuck, like, that you do want to do more and you know that there is more, but it's easy to get so caught up on like the deliverables and delivering to clients that sometimes you really have to force yourself to kind of take a step back and think through, okay, how do we improve this? And I'm not going to lie, I mean, I think most business owners will agree, especially for me. I can say personally the challenge has been like actually making the time to take a step back and to really evaluate and understand, like, okay, big picture, where are we now? What does, and without getting into too much of the detail because we're going to jump into like what the golden age is, but like where are we now, where do we want to be, and then kind of mapping out the plan to get there. I think for me personally that's been challenging to just take a step back because I think sometimes there's this concern that if you do that, you're not spending time in the details and you're not spending time in the business, and so something's going to get dropped or something's not going to be done right. Like there's so many in my mind. Sometimes I'm like, before we did this I was like, there's so many other things we need to do, but one of the things that I remember you telling me was like, if we don't do this, we're never going to get to a point where you can take a step back from the details and really help the team lead and grow that the way that they should. So I think sometimes when people think about like a strategy and development plan for themselves, for their business, for the team, a lot of times people think like it requires you to kind of take it, not think. The reality is it does require you to take a step back. But one of the things I am curious on, just as you've been doing like the speaking engagements and getting out, I know personally I've struggled with learning to take a step back to evaluate this. What has been some of the feedback from like business owners as you've been on stage? Because you've been, I think in July you did like, in June actually, May and June, you did like, between May and June, you've done like probably what, 5, 6 speaking engagements? Does that sound about right? Or more than that?
I've kind of lost track on how many we've done, but what I will say is when I first introduced the idea of the golden age, of course, a lot of people are like, well, what is
What is
that?
that?
Or like, some people are just like, are you talking about like retirement or are you talking about people who are old? And what
Yeah.
I was like, it's like, no, it doesn't actually, it's an acronym. And as I started breaking it down, and for me what was amazing is just seeing people's eyes light up in the audience, because what people would come to me afterwards and say, this is what we were missing, like what you did, this is the piece that was missing. And I've had
Mm,
several VPs of multi-billion dollar companies come to me and say, hey, what you shared was the missing piece for us, like we really need more of what you talked about, because that is going to solve so many problems for us. And so I was
mhm,
just like, all right, we got to find a different way to really continue to go in more depth about it. And then
mhm,
even some of the resources that we created, where we created some simple resources for people to follow along and to help them implement the golden age in their business. And the feedback I've been getting from people is, I love how simple this is and I love how clear it is. So that I would say that's some of the feedback that I've been getting.
okay. Would you, and maybe let's kinda take a step back and just define the golden age because we haven't done that yet. So, how would you define the golden age?
Yeah. So when I think about the golden age, one of the things that I always ask myself is, there has to be some type of process that we use to actually get results. Because when you think about any type of business, there's a process that you go through. No one goes from like, 0 to a million just like that. It's a gradual process. And so what we decided was, when it came down to the golden age, what I looked at is said, all right, how can we develop a simple way to approach process? And when we identified, we said, okay, you're going to have people that are performing at the average level, people that are performing at the good level, people that are performing at the excellent level. But what the golden age is, in which age, that is the acronym, average, good, excellent, what it is a simple process and a system that helps people identify what average, good, and excellent is, and then gives them the tools to have the right conversations and to develop the right strategies to help them, help their business, help their people go from being average to good to excellent so that they can get better results. And so the entire thing is about really helping people navigate through that journey.
Got it. No, that makes sense. And I think one of the things that I think about with just the acronym itself is I think it really helps you if I think about personally for me and our team and just implementing this in the business. I think it gives you a good sense of really being able to gauge where everyone is. Like, even if I think about it being used on myself, is you can kind of see, okay, when you develop the metrics of what does average look like, what does good look like, what does excellent look like, it helps you understand where everyone is because the truth is not everyone is in the same place. Because the way that I've typically seen, even at bigger companies, performance reviews done, it's like kind of like all or nothing, right? So either you have the skill or you don't, right? So it's like this year, I want you to work on being a better communicator. Okay. What does that mean, right? Versus like having this year, I need you to work on like defining within being a better communicator. What does average look like as a communicator? Where are you now? What does good look like, and then what does excellent look like, right? So when you give that feedback, it becomes a lot more impactful to say, for example, with developing your communication, hey, average looks like, and maybe this is a good one for you to talk through, Terrell, but like maybe an example of if the feedback is, hey, the way that we've traditionally handled development, like if I said, hey, I, Lola, need to work on being a better communicator. So the feedback is just, well, you just need to work on being a better communicator. That's the feedback. But from a golden age perspective, if you're giving that feedback to your team, what would be the way that you would set it up from an age perspective?
Yeah, so if you're thinking about, trying to be a better communicator, the big challenge and the big issue that I notice when looking at, so many different organizations, even so many different speakers, from whether it's comedians to whether it is public speakers, whether it's politicians, preachers, whether it's CEOs, podcasters, actors, actresses, like all throughout the list, one of the things that I recognize is that the people who we call good or that are great at what they do, if you go back and you look at some of their earlier footage, you realize they didn't just go from being or not so good to as great
Yeah.
as they were. There were some steps in between. So if I went to someone and I said, okay, all right, this person needs to work on becoming a better communicator. So what I would literally do is lay out, okay, all right, give them a picture of what an average communicator looks like, and then give them a picture of what a good communicator looks like, which may be, hey, there's a couple more skills in there, like they know how. Let's say, for example, an average communicator just gets up, says what they're going to say, and then they sit down. Well, a good
Mhm.
communicator may be a person who says what they're going to say, but they add a little bit more emotion into it. But then I may say an excellent communicator is someone who gets up, says what they're going to say, adds a little bit of more emotion, but also can react to the things on the spot that the audience is saying and doing. And so when you start creating, though that scale, a person who's all the way at the bottom doesn't feel like they need to become excellent overnight. A person who's at
Mm.
the bottom can really tailor and say, I need to work on being able to bring my emotion into it. So they can kind of work on it piece by piece because they're like, I can go from average to good. And then once I kind of get good, then I can figure out how do I go to excellent and continue that path. And when you look at it that way, I think it really helps a lot of people take the pressure off, but also
Mm.
continue on that journey to just becoming better at whatever the subject matter is.
Yeah, so I want to spend some time on that, like where you said it's important for people to not feel like they have to go from average to excellent like overnight. One of the things that you've mentioned, like as I've seen like some of the speeches and the conversations you've had and the talks you've done, is kind of the science behind it, like why it is important to go from, like why you're not just going from average to excellent. Can you talk a little bit about that, like how the brain works and just kinda like the science behind it? I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, so I mean, when you think about, how or why the golden age works and why I'm so excited about the golden age is because it does literally take, the way the brain works, all what we would call like cognitive behavior or neuroscience. It actually takes the elements of neuroscience and cognitive behavior and it puts it in a simple process that we all can use. Because whenever you're doing anything, the way that your brain works is your brain hears words or your brain it hears a sound in your brain is trying to create an image so it can send a message to the rest of your body about what it just read or what it just heard. For example, if you're driving down the road and you hear sirens, now your brain hears the sound and immediately your brain starts painting a picture of either an ambulance or a police car or it
Mm,
paints a picture of a fire truck. Like your brain is able to recognize that sound and then create an image. And then based on the image that you see, your body then reacts to what you saw. And so when it comes down to achieving progress in different areas, one of the biggest challenges that I saw is that, especially in business, that people just didn't have a way to create a mental picture about what they were actually aiming for. And so when you think about the golden age, what it does is it gives people a simple way to create a picture. If we go back to the example where we were talking about, becoming a more effective communicator, when we look at what average is a person who gets up there, they can get through their content, get through whatever they were going to say and then they sit down. Now,
mhm,
immediately when I say that, everybody now has a picture of what average looks like. And
mhm,
then if I say, okay, good is a person who can do that, they can get up, share their message, but they can also work in emotion into what they're saying to help the audience actually get into the message a little bit more. Now, after saying that, people can now start to visualize what that looks like. And so,
mhm.
what I realized when you start looking at like cognitive behavior and the way neuroscience works is if you can give people an image, like the way the human brain works is people are more likely to be able to figure it out or to be able to make progress if you can give them a picture of what they're aiming for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I am curious though, like the communicator one I think is good and I think that's kind of broad, but like I'm curious like as a business owner, like if I'm thinking to myself, so maybe let's use some of the ones that we've worked through on our end. If our goal is to if we're thinking about applying age to how we deliver to our clients, right? Whether it's like let's say existing clients, let's say the month end reporting process, so, or maybe that's not a good one. I'll use one for a generic business owner. Let's say I'm thinking about growing my business and I want to apply the age aspect to it. So, I'm just thinking because sometimes the challenge I have in applying age is like not getting too big picture. Like for example, I want to grow the target is I want to grow the business. I want to grow the business to $10 million a year. Like whatever
Okay.
the target is, right? So like if I'm trying to grow the business to $10 million a year, is that a specific enough goal to start the age process or does it need to be like more specific than that? Like that's where I tend to struggle with like, I know you can apply age to any part of the business, but, like, how specific, how granular should it be?
So I always say that, the age process, it starts with a goal, especially if you're working in a business. It's going to start with an overall goal for the business. And then you step into, okay, all right, now we got to identify what are the drivers to make that goal a reality. And then where you start to really paint the picture of what the age, the average, good, excellent looks like is at the driver level. And I would say for anyone that's listening or watching this, if you go to www.onegoldenage.com, there's some free resources there. There's actually a free, resource that walks people through this process that I'm saying right now. And what it will do is it'll help kind of understand it a little bit more. And so let's say a company wants to say their goal is $10 million. So I would say,
Mhm,
okay, all right, if $10 million is the company goal, or let's say that's one of the goals, the next question I would ask is, okay, what will it take for you to get to $10 million? What are the drivers? And as we start to break it down, let's say if one of the drivers is the number of customers that we have, cool.
Mhm,
And then let's say if it's the price that those customers are paying, all right, great. Now, let's say if those are your two drivers, the number of customers you have and the price that people are paying. So what I would say is, okay, based on your what is your average price right now? And let's say for that company, if their average price is, let's say, $1,000 a month. So I would say
mhm,
if your average price is $1,000 a month, then we can do the math and we can figure out how many clients you need to actually achieve $10 million in revenue. Now,
okay,
if you're not at 10 million already, then it's going to be a pathway so we can clearly see, like, let's say if you only had 500 customers, well then,
mhm,
okay, how do we go from 500 customers to the number of customers you actually need to hit that $10 million mark? And so let's say if you went from 500 customers, the good goal would be, let's say you hit 750 customers. And then
mm,
let's say the excellent goal is you hit 1,000 customers. And then because pricing is another factor of you being able to achieve that goal, we'll say, well, if your average price is $1,000, well, if we were doing good, let's say if we got our pricing up to $1,500, and let's say if we were doing excellent, let's see if we got our pricing up to $2,000 per customer on average. And then
mhm.
by having that roadmap on both the number of customers you need and what customers are paying, now you've given yourself some targets to actually aim for. And the way that your brain works, and like I said, with the cognitive behavior and the way neuroscience works, is if I paint a picture or if I give you a destination, your brain is wired subconsciously to start figuring out how to go from point A to point B. And what I've seen with so many companies is they'll say this big goal of we want $10 million, but no one's ever really drawn that picture clear enough for them for their subconscious brain to start
Yeah.
working to their advantage. And I think when you lay out the age that way, it really helps to start filling in those gaps because your brain is wired to do a lot of the work for you if you give it the right picture.
I think that's really good. And that's like a practical map out an example. One of the things that I do, you mentioned, was that oftentimes like organizations or businesses don't really give people the picture that they need to be able to kind of visualize and see what that average, great, and excellent, good, and excellent would look like. I think another thing also that I see sometimes, Terrell, is like people will come up with goals, like for example, the $10 million goal, and they won't even get like buy-in or alignment from the team, right? So it's like the two things that you mentioned, the pricing factor and also the like number of customers, those require like engagement from, depending on the size of your organization, your sales team, your team that comes up with pricing, because you need to factor different things into the equation. And so like it's important to make sure, from my perspective, right, that you get buy-in and people sign on and almost like agree. And I think one of the things that I think through is one of the examples that you came up with in the process we did when we were doing the age process for our employees, was when we defined the metrics. I remember one of the things that you did is you just sat in a meeting with them and you were like, "Hey, okay, so this is what I think, from like, let's say, a senior accountant, this is how many clients I think they should be managing or should be doing. Before we sign off on this, or before you sign off on this, let's just walk through understanding how much time does it take you per client, like on average. And let's be as, let's just provide an estimate. How long do you think it takes you to do XYZ work for this client? On average, how many hours a month?" And I think what that helped do is when someone is involved in the process of calculating and setting the beginning point and the starting point of what average looks like and where we are right now, I think you have a higher likelihood of buy-in, because it's not like you're just handing me this number. You're not just telling me, "Hey, we're gonna need to get to $10 million." I feel like if I have a say in kind of the process of where we're starting from, and we both agree that, hey, this is where we are today, I think oftentimes it's a lot easier for people to buy into what good looks like and what excellent looks like. Would you Would you agree
I
with
mean, I
that
would totally
perspective?
agree with that because I mean, if you think about like the times that you worked in, whether it's in corporate America, whether it's in a small business, if the CEO walks in and says, "We're going to grow by 25%," everybody else, some people in the room are going to be like, "Well, yeah, we can do it." Other people in the room, like, "How the heck did you pick 25%? Like, I don't think we
Right.
can do it." To where I think you're absolutely right. If other people on the team are not part of that process, or if other people on the team don't believe in the destination, then they're not going to be working to help get there. So I do agree that is definitely part of that picture. And I think that that's why if you came up with a goal, for example, let's say you take that same CEO who walked in the room and said, "Hey, we want to grow by 25%. But here's the reality. Right now, we're only growing by 10%. So what we want to do first is we want to go from 10 to 15%. And then after 15%, we want to go to 20%. And after
Mhm.
20%, 25% is our excellent goal that we're aiming for. You're more likely to get buy in from the rest of the team as opposed to saying, we're going to go from 10 to 25. Most of the people in the room are not that optimistic. They're not going to be like, well, yeah, let's go do it. I mean, and
Yeah,
and I
I
think
agree.
that that's the other element that as to why it works so well is because it utilizes that other thing called motivate, I guess you say momentum. Is once you start getting moving in a certain direction, a lot of times that momentum is what's going to carry you to keep you moving in that right direction. I mean,
Mm,
it's almost like when you start your day off, and let's say if you get a few really good things accomplished early in the morning, studies show that you're probably going to have a very effective day, which is why I think it was like that famous video that came out, a couple years ago where I think it was a military general who stood up at a graduation and said, "Hey, when you begin every day, start with making your bed." So it was
yeah.
like you start the day off with at least something accomplished, and it starts this momentum of if you start with accomplishment and you start getting smaller victories, the chances are you're probably going to have a little bit more confidence when it's time to tackle some of the bigger things. And what I just noticed, the way that so many different companies and so many different people were trying to approach motivating their team, the issue they were having is their team had to go from 0 to 100, and people
Mm.
just don't naturally have enough motivation to do that big of a leap without some type of head start or some type of momentum.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think it just one of the things that I also saw through the process was that when you involve the team, they help you come up with the good and excellent. Because it's almost like their eyes open up and they say, "Hey, like, all right, this is where we are right now. The math makes sense. I can see it." And they're like a lot more likely to support and actually bring ideas on how you can go to good and ideas on how you can go to excellent. So I think it's definitely a testament, and I'm excited to kind of talk through it. I feel like this is definitely something where it's like we're implementing it real time in the business. And so I'm excited to just share some of the progress, share like the results that we've seen in the business because I think it's going to be extremely helpful to other business owners as they walk through the journey and try it out in their own individual businesses.
I totally agree. And so when people start to ask me that question about, okay, all right, Terrell, you told me what the golden age is. It's a process to help us go from average to good to excellent. You've explained to me why it works, like the science behind it. Whereas, you got the neuroscience, you got the cognitive behavior, you have the theories of motivation and momentum. I get all that. So, how do I do it? Well,
Mm,
we'll do it really, really quickly is the way that it breaks down, I think, is by starting off something that you said, Lola. I think is you got to define out what is your goal? What are you aiming for? After we define what is the goal, the next step is to figure out what are the drivers, what are the incremental things, the milestones that we need to work on to help us actually achieve those goals. For a business, let's say in our business, we run an accounting firm. One of the goals was we wanted to achieve a certain level of revenue. So then what we did is we started looking at everybody in the business and we said, how does this person impact the revenue goal? And if we looked at our bookkeepers, we said, well, based on the number of clients that they can actually support, that's how they will contribute to us achieving the revenue goal. We looked at the marketing team. The marketing team, it was based on the number of leads that they generate. Based on the sales team, the number of clients that the number of leads that they convert into clients. And so we were able to identify how everyone in the organization, how they play a role in helping us achieve what that revenue target was. And then
Mhm.
once we figured out kind of how they played a role, then it was all right, let's understand what is their capacity today. For the bookkeepers, we went through that process to understand, like, okay, all right, how many clients can one bookkeeper actually support? And so we did is, like you said, we met with some of the bookkeepers. I mean, and we walked through what was their capacity. And as we walked through what their capacity was, they helped us define what average looked like. And then all we had to do is figure out, okay, what does good look like? What does excellent look like? Now that bookkeeper has a very clear roadmap on what that journey could look like. Now,
Mhm.
I think it'll be good for people to hear because you walked, some of our team through kind of that capacity study. What was that conversation like when you were working with the team on that?
It was interesting because I think they went into it a little bit timid in the sense that like they weren't really sure of the purpose of the exercise. And I think one of the things that I had to reaffirm to them was we're not doing this because we're trying to get rid of your job or because I think oftentimes when people do capacity studies, that's kind of like what goes to people's mind, like especially in corporate, right? It's like you're trying to assess how I spend my time. Like, oh my gosh, that means you're either going to give me a lot more work or you're trying to get rid of my job. And so I think we just had to reaffirm, like, hey, we want to make sure that you are being challenged and we want to make sure that you feel like your time is being maximized, and we want to think about, do we have opportunity to improve the way that we do things today? So I want to get your sense, kind of, this is how I pitched it. I want to get your perspective on a day-to-day basis. If you think about your tasks through the month, how long does it take you to do X, right? How many hours? And it was a very casual conversation. Like we had a spreadsheet, we went through each client, they gave kind of a ballpark. And I learned some things also through the process. Like I learned that with certain clients, there's more complexities, certain clients I didn't know. So that was helpful because I think evaluating this process helps the business owner also be able to understand, or the leader, the manager, the director, whatever, be able to understand, okay, where are they gaps in this process that maybe I didn't know there were, right? So the capacity study for me really, I think, empowered the team member, the bookkeeper specifically, to be able to kind of give that insight. And then I think the reaction has been the same when people see the results. It's like, oh, okay, I, work 40 hours a week. Based on what I'm seeing, it looks like I have capacity to do more. Or, hey, I'm spending too much time on this specific client. What is maybe happening here that we need to improve? If it's a process that's manual that we need to change, like what is it about the specific client that's taking us more time? And so I think the capacity study did a couple of things. I think one, it was, of course, a great foundation for the age conversation, but I think also it allowed us to see, where do we have gaps and where do we have room for improvement? And then I think the third thing it also did, which I personally think was the very important one, was it empowered the team member to be able to say, based on the results of this, it kind of gave them a view on how they were spending their time. And I think when we finally got to the age conversation, it was so much easier for me to get buy-in because they're like, okay, right now it's taking me, I'm doing 16 clients, whatever. And I'm like, okay, hey, from our perspective, when I look at kind of where we're trying to grow to, you would need to do 20 clients as an example. And they're like, yeah, I definitely see that. And I'm like, okay, so what do you think we can improve in our process today to make sure that you can do that and it's not overwhelming, then they're more likely to say, okay, I think I can stop doing this, or I think I can change the way that I do that. So I found that when we started with the capacity study, they were a lot more engaged in kind of understanding and evaluating, one, do the targets we have for the age process work, but more importantly, like, what can we do to improve um our existing processes today so that they can be more efficient in delivering to our clients.
I mean, that sounds like a very awesome experience for the team to go through because, you know, even I was in the room when you were walking through that with them, and and I could tell in the beginning, yeah, it seemed like they were a little apprehensive as to, well,
Mhm.
why are we actually walking through this? But
Right, like,
I
why are we
do
doing
think
this?
that I think a helpful thing that happened after the conversation, or I'd say on the back half of the conversation, is where you really got to be the leader to really help remove roadblocks, to understand, like, all right, if this is the goal that you're supposed to be aiming for, how can I help you achieve that goal? And
Mhm.
like, whether we need to invest in new technology, or let's say if somebody else on the team is doing something that's slowing you down, hey, how can we step in to help remove that roadblock so this can work a lot better? And I think when we started having those conversations with the team, I think the team really saw, like, hey, this thing actually really does work, or hey, this is actually a good thing, because what this has been able allowed me to do, it's allowed me to talk about the things that were slowing me down, but I didn't want to come off as a person who was complaining, but it gave me the
Mm,
opportunity to speak about those things, like, hey, if we change this process, I could probably move a little faster. And when we started making those, I started noticing, like, people's productivity dramatically started increasing, because I was just like, we should not be missing any deadlines. But I think when we
yeah.
walked through that, it really started to bring some great things to light. Um, and another thing that I thought was very interesting during that process as well was really helping people understand, you know, how they were spending their time, and then being able to point out to them, oh, I see why this is taking longer. We no longer need to do that process, because what we
Right.
started doing is we started eliminating some of the things that they were doing. And I think this going through this golden age process allowed us to get an assessment on how they were spending their time, so that we could eliminate the things that were slowing them down, and we can tell them, like, hey, we no longer need to do that. And I think also it gave them that peace of mind of saying, like, they now felt like they had a voice in the process, to where they weren't just being told what to do, but they can kind of help really guide how this thing should be done.
Yeah, no, that's I would agree with that 100%. I think that was also that was a very big benefit of doing that because like you said, I think people may feel like they're complaining or they don't want to bring it up because it's like if this is a process that's maybe inefficient, but it's like what I've always done and how I've always done it, like I don't want to push back or I don't want to say that this process sucks. But it's like, no, this is a good opportunity for you to we see the numbers, what do the numbers tell us? And then based on that, what do we need to change to be more efficient in what we're doing?
Yeah, because that is one of the things that I saw in interviewing, like, so many different businesses, is that's one of those really big issues that would kill a business's ability to actually be excellent. It was people getting very used to what they've been doing, to where now at this point they're just kind of going through the motion. Or it's like people were experiencing, roadblocks, or they were experiencing problems, and they just didn't have a way to bring it up in a productive way without feeling like they were going to be seen as people who are just complaining. And when they would do that, eventually that person would just be so dejected, or they would just be so, I guess, they unmotivated to really
Right.
push through it, to where they're just like, hey, I'm just trying to do enough to not get fired, or hey, I'm just trying to do the best I can. When I'm just like, if there's a roadblock that's slowing you down from actually being effective at your job, we should probably identify it and remove it. Like, you shouldn't have to struggle to do your job. If there is a roadblock that we can work together, address, and help you move through. And I think when more companies started really implementing this golden age, one of the biggest things that they said is that it allowed them to have the type of conversations that they needed to have for their business to get better. Because without the golden age, they were just like, we really didn't have a way to bring those conversations up or to deal with those issues. And so that's another reason why I think it works, and how companies have already started being successful in implementing it as we've been sharing it with more people.
I think also it takes the emotions out of feedback. Because if we both agree that this is the process and we both agree this is how we get better, then when I'm having a conversation with you at the end of the month about how you're sitting below average, it's a very, for lack of a better word, unemotional conversation, especially if you have bought into the fact that this is what average looks like. This is our starting point. If you're below average, then okay. I don't even, if I'm getting into a meeting with you and we're giving feedback, like I don't even have to make a comment and be like, well, right now you're below average. No, you're going to look at the numbers and you're going to see, ooh, this month I'm below average, or this month I'm at meeting expectations. And I think like it has kind of, I've seen on the team that it also kind of has created this idea of like competitiveness almost to reach
Mhm.
excellence, because sometimes the teams are like, man, like I was like a couple of points away from, or a couple of calls, or a couple of leads, or a couple of days, one day away from excellent, right? Or one day away from good. And so I think that it also creates that spirit of there's no gray area in feedback, because this is how you're being measured. And we can have a conversation, and then we can understand, why did it happen this month? How can we improve it? Or why is whatever needs to happen not happening? What help do you need to improve it?
Absolutely. So what I want to do is, now this is, for the people who are actually watching us, watching this, you'll get to see this. So this is why you probably should go over to YouTube and make sure you're watching the episodes, because I'm going to share my screen and I want to show a image of what it looked like when we went through kind of that exercise with a staff member. So let me just go ahead and share my screen. Like I said, for the people who are not watching us online, you won't be able to see this, but you can also go to the website and you can look at it. So, what we're looking at here is, this was a performance review for one of the bookkeepers. And what I loved about it was it made it a lot easier for them to see what their three core objectives are. So, every month they know, here's what my objectives are. Like, I can easily see what my scorecard looks like, if I'm in the average, if I'm good, or if I'm excellent. And one of the things that this made it a lot easier for was for them to actually start having those healthy conversations. So I want you to talk to me a little bit about, like, the first month when you actually pulled this up and you had a conversation with the staff member, and you can just pick one of the metrics for the sake of time, and just, how did that conversation go?
Um, it went well. I will say when we first did this, I think that if I remember correctly, we I'll say this. I think there were two conversations I had. There was one conversation that I actually had with an individual who was part of the development process on the capacity study, and we established the goals based off of that capacity study, right? So we knew on average this is where the person was, and then we knew average, good, and excellent was kind of metric. So they were involved in that process. Then we had another employee who came into the company after some of these were established, right? So I feel like for employees that were part of the process, when I gave feedback, a lot of the conversation was on understanding like why we had some of the shortfalls we did. So, like, for example, average I'll talk about days to close. So, like, for days to close, having conversations with the team, I'm like, hey, So when I look at our actuals, the right column was populated. So if I say, hey, this month you were on time this month, right? And then the conversation becomes, okay, I was on time this month, but hey, there's some other things that I'm working to develop on to see if I can get the bookkeeping faster. So I feel like those conversations are easier to have because I'm asking, like, hey, so when you think about your development plan, like I had a conversation, for example, with one of the bookkeepers on the team, and I said, hey, like, I know that you desire to grow beyond just doing bookkeeping, and you would like to be, well, first of all, are you interested in being promoted? Are you interested in doing something else outside of the bookkeeping? The answer was yes. And I'm like, hey, if that is the goal you have, then you're going to have to learn how to manage more responsibilities, which means you're probably going to have to be closer to the excellent, right? And so I think having those conversations helps them understand, like, okay, if I'm thinking about taking on more responsibilities in a promotion, then average probably won't work. Because if I'm thinking about like someone going from a bookkeeper to a senior accountant, you need to learn how to manage things better, which means you need to learn how to have capacity to do more and manage more and take on more. And so I think this how it's gone has been more of a discussion on how we improve and more of a discussion on what we do differently than like someone arguing with me about the time that it took. Well, technically, you're saying I'm on time, but there was this issue with this report or there was this issue here. Like, we don't have time for that. So I think we all agree. And I think also one of the things I do want to say that is extremely important is tracking the information and making sure that actuals that we have a process, a very visible process where everybody can see how they're performing. So, like, for example, for the bookkeeping one, it's a little bit different because for us, how we measure performance is, okay, how many days did it take us to close? And so we have identified different milestones for the bookkeeper. So, for example, for the bookkeeper, it's the number of transactions they classify or when they finish classifying their transactions. We set deadlines. If they hit that deadline, then they're considered on time. Then there's another milestone that says, hey, the feedback that the senior accountant gave to you, how quickly did you respond back to address that? If there's a deadline of 24 hours, did you do that on time? Were you late? And then based on those two dates, we kind of average and say, okay, how late or on time were they? And then we measure that to determine their days to close. So I think it's extremely important. One of the things that has made a difference is making it visible when you're tracking the goals and for them to understand how are the goals being measured, right? So I think the more clear you are with your team about how exactly the goals are being measured, the easier it is for them to, when they review the actuals, no one's going to be surprised about what the numbers are.
Absolutely, and I think that that is a great way to kind of wrap up episode one. Is, the golden age really gives businesses and leaders that ability to create a simple scorecard, because what you know is, if you know anything about sports, is if you don't have a scorecard, you don't know who's winning, who's losing, you don't know who's doing well and who's not doing well. Well, the golden age is that thing that allows you to have a scorecard for what you are doing. And through the rest of this entire podcast series, we're going to be diving into the golden age and how it applies to different areas of your business. And we're going to be breaking it down on some examples. So definitely come back for more and click subscribe, tell a friend, and make sure you visit the website onegoldenage.com to download your free resource to help you start implementing the golden age in your business. Thanks for tuning in.